What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Immortal Minds. Today is, as you can see, a very Cloud9 themed episode. You got myself, Mike, as per usual, and we have special guests Vice and Shinobi joining us from Cloud9. So, what's up, guys? How's it going?
Doing
It's
all
going
right?
it's going well. Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, we were really excited to talk to you guys. I feel like we're going to have some really cool discussions. There's a lot of really interesting talking points. Mike, what have you been up to before we get into the deep end?
Lots of watching demos, not playing ranked because that's been kind of grim. But excited to do the show this weekend.
Yeah, speaking of Grim, I know that in the Discord, for example, you typically advertise it to people as a place they can go to see you moan about the patch notes. And so the patch is the first destination of our talking points, which it definitely didn't live up to, I think, what people were looking for. And so I think I first want to get the sort of initial thoughts from you guys, Vice and Shinobi.
Mhm.
I think everyone was expecting something to happen to Jet. I don't know what that
Yeah.
was supposed to look like, but
Mhm.
what was your takeaway from the patch initially?
I
You
think
want to go first? Yeah.
yeah, I can start. I think the race changes were good. Like I don't think that it makes the character like bad by any means, but I think the damage when they did the first nerf when they lowered the damage from like 75 to 50, it didn't even feel like that was significant at all. Like it still seemed like she was insane. But I like the fact that the satchels seem way more about her mobility and giving another duelist a way of like closing the gap and being kind of like filling that niche that Jet kind of is supposed to fill um, as a rifler. And I didn't like the idea of like satchels being like a get out of jail free card. Like if you're getting pushed, you just like throw satchels at the enemy team and you just like blow them up. So I think the change is definitely good. And like with the Guardian, I'm a big fan of the gun, so I like
That's your gun, Josh.
it is my gun, but I think it's a good change. I think the Guardian should see more play. I think some people, I mean, like even myself included, even though I like the weapon, it's like very situational still as a gun. So like I think you're not gonna see like all of a sudden a million people are like everyone's just buying the Guardian, but I think it has more use, and I think it's good. It's a good change overall.
hmm Yeah, I'd say with Raze, like, I mean, I was so used to just Raze being so overpowered. So like, when they changed her satchel, it seemed like she's kind of useless, but I think she's more balanced now. I think the satchel was, I mean, it was too strong, it was too overpowered. So I agree with Josh or Shinobi in that like it's more focused on her movement now, which is I think important for duelists, right? Because they're supposed to be going in first. So and the Guardian, yeah, obviously, like I feel like it's never used in pro play, which is kind of what their basis was as to like why they wanted to buff it. And I think it was a good buff. So
Yeah, that was something I was really surprised about when I was watching. I guess a lot of the tournaments recently, Blast, the Pop Flash Invitational, and Pulse as well. Like it just doesn't seem like people really wanted to use the Guardian ever. It was always the case that the Bulldog was picked over it, which I often found kind of strange because it feels like the Bulldog has it feels like you have to hit that ADS like headshot
Mhm.
instantly. Like and even if you miss, let's say you do some damage on that first go, it takes so long to get the second burst going that it feels like you're already dead if you're against
mm,
Yeah.
someone with a better buy. So I was always really kind of it felt like a weird place. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some better results there for people or a better option in terms of opportunity cost. There's something else in terms of the weaponry, that they highlighted was the operator, and this is something that I think there's two parts of this. There's the aspect of the operator in professional play, which is are teams currently able to deal with the operator correctly and punish it? Is it that Jet is too strong? Is it that the kind of default based meta makes the operator look better than maybe it is? Or
Mhm.
is it actually the case that the operator does need to see some nerfs? Like, where do you guys stand on this?
You wanna start?
yeah, so I think it's like a complicated issue. It's not so simple as to just like nerf the gun, right? Like I think the op in Jet's hands is a very different situation than like an op in Cypher's hands or something, right? Because her like kit is so like it synergizes well with the op and just like the entire game itself, like if you compare it to CS, like you have unique abilities, so you don't have like 5 smokes, 10 flashes, 5 mollies, right? So it's if you're working a spot, like let's say you want to default around and you're working the spot and you don't have the right utility to push the opper back, then you pretty much have no counterplay against the op, which is kind of a problem. But I mean, that kind of lends to the idea or like the general like approach to the game itself, which is like you're combining abilities together to like take the site or something. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a solution right now, but it's definitely like a complicated problem. It's not so easy to fix, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think like adding a scope sound would be good. I don't want them to
Yeah.
like make the op like useless. So, like I don't think that's ever gonna be like the case. Like I don't think they're gonna nerf the gun to where it's just like not a viable weapon. And I think for like our team, I think we're pretty good about dealing with ops like in general, maybe more so than other teams. But a lot of it is like like Dan said, Vice. It's like there's like a decent amount of guesswork that has to come into play with like when you're working a specific spot. If an op is there, I mean, you just have to be smart. Like, if you know you can't deal with it, you don't just like swing into the op. Like, I see
Yeah.
that happening a lot, especially in NA. Like, there's an op in this. Oppers just have free reign. Like, you look at like the Pop Flash tournament, like Shanks when he's like playing TSM, he's just like flying around, being hyper aggressive, and like he's not getting punished. And you know, whether or not that's like a result of the op being broken or it being Jet, or it's just like not. I'm not like calling it out. It's just like if you're not on the ball, you're gonna get punished by the op, and
Yeah.
that's like the same thing in CS. Like if you just dry peek ops and you're not smart about using your abilities, you're gonna get punished, and I don't think that's any different in this game.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one because if you imagined a world where let's say let's say we have a let's say Jet's not even nerf, but we have like a pick ban type phase,
Mhm.
some kind of a draft,
Yep.
and because Jet is so prominent, she's the one that's getting banned. So you're not going to see her in the games. The closest thing to that kind of gameplay is Reyna, but
Mhm.
Reyna with the dismiss, you do have to get the kill at
Yep.
least
Yeah.
to actually be rewarded in that way. So there is actually something to the risk. And with Jet, it doesn't feel like there is a risk, and I think that is truly where the issue tends to be. So, do you think in that world the operator, like no, people wouldn't be complaining about the operator? Is it just like so much about the fact that Jet can abuse it at the pro level?
I think people will still find a way to complain. I just think it's like how it is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I definitely think like if I would change something with Jet, I don't even feel. I think people are like way more fixated on her dash. I think really the biggest change is that you have to make the right click, not just recharge when they're ult. Like I think it's like that's the most broken thing I think about
Hmm.
Jet is like being able to just like, I mean, you don't even have to get rewarded for hitting like nice shots. You literally just fly in, right click daggers on somebody, instantly recharge them, and you can just multi frag. Where I think like either making it where you get like one knife back, so you have to hit the headshot, I think would be like a good solution. If they really want to like go and nerf the dash, I would just like make it where the direction you're looking is how you would dash instead of being able to just like take an op shot on an angle, dash like in the
Dash
same.
backwards or
Yeah, you'd
sideways.
have to because I think that would also make Jet feel more of like that actual entry fragger role where like you're running out a lot more, like using the dash more aggressively. Because right now it's like pretty. In most scenarios, people feel like if you aggro dash, it's like not really a good use of her ability. It's more used in like a defensive way, unless you're like using your knives, right? Where you're like doing some kind of combo, like you're dashing and updrifting, and looking for like a dagger kill. But yeah, that's probably like what I would do with the agent. Is just change the functionality of the dash a little bit, and then the right click on the daggers I think needs to be changed.
Yeah, so I mean, I completely agree. I think that's like it's such a good point. Pretty much everything Jed has kind of feels S tier at this point in time. You can't really say any ability is less than extremely good in a kit. But one of the things that was surprising, I think, a couple patches ago, is that we had that massive breach buff when
Mhm.
I feel like he was already coming into meta. He was already
Yep.
very good. It's just that people weren't really focusing on him in their compositions as much
Mhm.
in the current meta in North America in particular. Um, so it seemed like that was supposed to be an indirect way for them to say, okay, guys, you're having problems with the operators and Jet. Here you go. Here's an
Yep.
extra flash on breach. Do you
Yeah.
think it's absolutely mental? Like what is happening?
Yeah, I think it's a little crazy. I think the changing the what is this the fault line is the little
Signature
stun.
one? Yeah.
The stun. I think that's like a good change to deal with ops, but I think the three flashes is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean,
Like
I think he was viable before already, but
yeah, he was.
they basically just overtuned like everything about him, right? Like,
Yep.
I think they could have just buffed his was it fault line that he said? Yeah.
Yep.
They could have just buffed the fault line and kept it at that. I think it would have been like a fine buff and he would have been balanced. But now it's just ridiculous, I think.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I know it's like people say it like with League of Legends, like when new champs come out, or there's like they add certain things, like they're just super OP and everyone's playing them. I don't really like that approach. Like, oh, an agent's not played, that means he's bad, so we need to like hyper buff him to make people play him. Because right now it's like I think Breach was good, but people like with the two flashes obviously and like the way he worked is like you have to really like work him into your comp. Like if you can find a way to utilize him, he's definitely like a really strong agent. But now it feels almost like
A necessity.
well, I wouldn't say because I mean we don't play Breach on every map, but I think it's still like he's really good. Like on certain maps, it feels like almost like a disservice if you don't work him into your comp in some way. Like he's just so good on like maps like Ascent. It's
Yep.
just it split. I feel like he's also insane. Like kind of what you mentioned from the Pop Flash tournament, DDK when we were briefly talking about that. Yeah, I think Breach right now he's I wouldn't say in a good place because he's overpowered, but you know he's a good agent, and I think teams should play him more. Obviously,
Yep.
Yeah, it's something that like it made me a little bit sad because it, as you said, it felt like Riot kind of really forced that they really wanted to force the hand of people to like be okay, Breach is meta now because you can't not play Breach. It's this like it's the opportunity cost thing where it's like his stuff is so good now that if
yep,
you don't have, you can't not have him. So you kind of take decisions away from the professionals.
yep,
And I feel like one of the coolest things about Valorant is that because there's so many different agents, unlike CSGO, where you don't have this dynamic. In CSGO, the meta changes happen very slowly because
yep.
developing a tactical and strategic answer to the current meta takes a lot of time. But in this game, having the ability to just
Hmm.
swap in and out agents completely changes how you can deal with things in a very quick manner in comparison. So I feel like it's not necessary, especially as you say, like Breach was in a pretty good spot before. So yeah, so kind of wrapping things up with the patch discussion, we did see a change to the matchmaking just so that you don't get split 5 times in a row or whatever it is. But considering that, I think a lot of people expected quite a lot from this particular patch.
Hmm.
What in a perfect world would you guys want to see patched into the game right now?
Hmm.
It's hard to say.
Yeah, that's a tough question.
I think
Well,
the
I
the
can think of
jet
one.
the jet daggers that we talked about for sure.
I could think of an easy one. Just
Yeah,
add
good.
a coaching slot to custom servers. I don't know why that's not in the game. That would be be a good start for sure for
Yeah,
something I'd like to see.
definitely.
But actual game changes one step at a time. We can see with the jet changes if they actually come. We'll see how it affects the game. But yeah, real important stuff is definitely the coaching implementation.
I mean, there's still like quite a lot of bugs. Like with Cypher,
Yeah.
if they use an ability where your cage is, you lose like the cage icon on your screen, so you lose track of where your cages are, which I think is kind of like it can make or break a game sometimes, in like a professional environment. So I mean, there's still quite a few bugs that needs to be fixed, I think, before they make any changes to like the actual like gameplay itself, I would say.
I did not know that about the cages.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
kind of sucks.
Oh
Thick.
yeah.
terrible. Yeah, it's terrible.
Wow. Okay. Well, moving things forward then. We've got a bunch of talking points, sort of, to discuss things around the meta that are interesting right now. And on this show, we often, I think, try to dispel what we think are poor takes in the community about changes or other things where people don't really they'll put forth a take and the analysis for it doesn't really seem very good. And one
Mhm.
of those, I think, is around Sage. Obviously, Sage has been nerfed so many times, and Sage is definitely much worse than she was.
Mhm.
But obviously, when stuff like this happens, everyone's immediately going to go away from Sage because you
Yep.
don't want to touch her. She seems like so rubbish. So the question is Sage still viable? I know that Mike, you have a lot to say on this, and I know that, for example, G2, who you've been looking at a lot, have still been running, like WP still been on the Sage and in various games and making it work.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's just because now you can't play her as reactively before because all the changes are just made so like on split you can't just be like walling and then slow right after it. I think like the way David P plays where he's kind of playing like aggro and walling up in different off angles is like the direction we thought it would go months ago, and now it's actually reaching that point. I also think like Sages in general, like the most of the way people were playing her across the region was like more reactive, and we weren't seeing a lot of defensive like, oh, we're gonna like slow gelato like Liquid did before they were Liquid and they're like fish 1 2 3. There wasn't a whole lot of like aggressive stuff like that. Because I think on Split in a sense she's still super viable, and you guys run her on Split, I think, right? Unless you changed it, but
We did, yeah, for a bit. I think like I think the biggest thing with the Sage changes, and I think is like important, is you don't get this just like safety net of just like, oh shit, they're hitting my site. Let me just like dump these slow orbs in this
Spam all my
wall. Yeah,
abilities.
use my abilities
Yeah.
here. Like one thing I've noticed right away, if we want to talk like meta changes, is like the ability to rush and like be more like having more of a variance in how you play the game. I think is like something I've noticed right away. Like on Split, you almost never saw people like maybe you saw like the party pairs play where like they dash up or they satchel jump A like A ramp and they go really aggressive toward A. That's like some play that people have done in the past, but you never really saw like B rushes being a thing that people can do. And I mean, you see from our practices, like there's definitely like a lot more capabilities of playing fast paced and mixing it up where you don't just like run into this brick wall of like Sage slows and her barrier orb and things like this. Like it makes it a lot harder. Like when she's not in the game, it's all of a sudden you have more options of how you can
Yeah.
play. And I think the way that Sage, in my mind, the way that Sage is used, I was when I played Sage originally on the team, like way back, like going back to our first tournaments when Infinite was still on our team, we used the wall in a lot of ways to just go and like play over smokes and like do counterplay like that. Not so much like using it to stop people from coming up. And I think that's kind of how you'll see the agent being used more when she's played, is like creating like high ground and different like weird angles that you wouldn't normally have access to with like other agents. I think it's like a big part. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we haven't played against any Sage in our pracs, and we haven't played her recently. Just like trying new things out with some comps that we've been playing. So I can't actually say how good or bad it is, but from the eye test, from what I've seen, that's like kind of how I view her as an agent right now. I still think that she has use, but it's more it's not so much just like get out of jail free and just kind of like defensive wall. You have to be a lot smarter with like how you use your abilities for
Yeah.
sure.
I would say I don't know. I think Sage is. I'll go on the extreme and I'll say like she's kind of useless now. I mean, like there's definitely uses for her, but you have to be very creative, and those scenarios are kind of very niche, where sometimes those scenarios will never actually come up in the game. And I don't know. I think Riot should have done like a give and take. Like they should have maybe buffed some part of her kit, but also taken away from some parts. But like what I got from the last patch was like, hey, stop playing Sage and start playing Breach, right? Like,
Yep.
Yeah.
and there's so many other agents that are like so much more worth picking up. Like maybe you could run a double smoke comp, run another duelist, right, which is kind of more common.
Hmm.
Run a breach, run the Sova, or there's just so many agents that you can choose from where it's like not really worth picking the Sage anymore. So I don't
So
know what they're gonna do with that, but
something I thought of as well is like they changed the satchels where with the Sage Wall, really the big counter, right, and why a lot of people were playing Raze is to deal with the not only deal with Sova and Cypher, but like also having a way of dealing with Sage Wall. You just blast back the wall and it's down instantly. So they like nerfed the Sage Wall, and then they also nerfed the satchels, which is kind of weird because I feel like it's like what you wanted Raze. They say that they want to get rid of, or maybe they didn't say this, but it feels like they're trying to get rid of like counterplay there. But then they add Breach into the game, and it's like he's like well, not add him, but they buffed him, and he looks like this is the agent that you have to play to counterplay Jet Op. That's kind of like what it feels like. So it's
yeah,
kind of like a weird uh, set of changes.
approach,
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
weird approach. Yeah, it's like they did
yeah.
it for one thing, but then they like took it away from two other agents. Very strange.
Yeah, the philosophy doesn't seem consistent
Yeah.
sometimes, for sure. And sometimes I wonder, is that because there's a bunch of hidden stuff that we're not aware of? Like, are there agents coming in, or the next couple, 2, 3 agents that will kind of balance things out somehow? Or it's really hard to say. But I definitely think that the Sage one was interesting too, because I feel like, and I know, I think you're on the same page here, Mike. There was a lot that we didn't see with regards to Sage and how she can make plays with the ice orbs, especially like specifically against because the ice orb is so good at either synergizing with other abilities, which is pretty typical. It's a pretty commonly understood thing. But I think less commonly understood and less seen was how you can use the ice orb to mess with timings. We do see it in some spots where in a default, a team will try to use the ice orb to try to like win an area so that the other team cannot be aggressive in that spot, which allows them to gain ground. But it can also like, mess with timings and stuff in a way that is different to smokes as it's not going to constrict any vision. So,
Mhm.
and that's something I don't think we did see too much creativity around. What were your thoughts around that, Mike?
I just think like the 30%, I think it's 30% reduction to the
Yep.
size of it just messes up like a lot of those aggressive plays, especially to mess up timings, because before you could slow and it would take like 75% of gelato, and that's so hard to escape unless you're like Jet or Raze or something like that. But now it's like it seems fairly easy to get around that slow if people are trying to be aggressive against you, especially at the start of the round.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, the patch before last, they reduced like the time of the slower as well, right? Like it's not on
Yeah,
the
I think
ground
as
as long
well.
anymore.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's rough.
Well, I think the next thing we want to talk about, I think we kind of touched on it already, which is just breach. And
Mhm.
what do we expect in terms of future tuning? Are they just going to get rid of a flash and leave it at that and call it a day, or what should they do with breach?
Yeah, I would say that's probably like that's like the easiest change to do is just take away one of his flashes again and give him two. If they really want to keep three,
Maybe
I
a
don't really know. I don't
cooldown.
really know what they could do. What they could do to make him balanced if they kept three flashes on him. They'd have to nerf the ult probably. But
Or nerf the duration of the flash,
yeah,
right?
the duration. Yeah, because
Because
right now his
before,
flash duration's the same. Well, so they
yeah,
kept his flash duration the same, and then they also made his pullout time like between flashes faster, so you can actually like pop flash a spot and run up and peek with breach, which like that's not really what he's designed to do, right? The whole concept of breach is supposed to be like a
support.
support character and like a initiator, but he just like can kind of entry with him in a lot of scenarios, especially on like defense. If there's like people in a spot, like bind long B, they're coming up long B. You just flash the corner, you run, you just flash again. They're just all sitting there blind, and you can just chase. And I don't think that's what he should be able to do as an agent,
Yeah, I agree.
especially like when there's a Phoenix in the game. You know, you have Phoenix, and he's supposed to be like filling that void as a character, but he just kind of seems like
Overshadowed.
yeah, not as yeah. I still think Phoenix is good, but if in different ways, flashes are not the best part of Phoenix.
Yeah.
That's actually a very good point. I hadn't thought about how it affects the opportunity cost of picking up Phoenix. Actually, that's an interesting one.
Mhm.
Yeah, I do like the idea that we had because I mean, is there a world of Riot just like, oops, we gave him three flashes. That was actually a typo. It's supposed to be two. Someone messed up. But will we see them just reverse that and be like, yeah, we
Mhm.
messed that up, or is it the case that he's actually supposed to have three flashes now, and they have to add a cooldown, which was suggested in chat. I think that's something we briefly, I think maybe you mentioned it, Mike, on one of the previous shows. Would a cooldown cut it for you guys, or is it just still just simply too much?
That'd be interesting, but I don't know if I like the idea of a cooldown. I'd rather just have two on will flat like at will flashes because
Hmm.
I think if there's well, it depends on what the cooldown is. Because if it's like too long, then it makes it difficult to actually take sites if he's gonna be your sole flash character, and almost makes it where you need to have like two flash characters in a lot of ways. Which I don't like that either. I like the thing I think that's so good about Valorant is just like the fact that the all the abilities are unique. It actually makes people make choices when it comes to like the compositions that they want to run. Because like you talked about with the meta and CS really moving slowly, a lot of that comes down to because everybody has access to the same toolkit, right? It's like answers to change like doing things is like a lot more black and white in a lot of ways. Like if teams throw smoke executes, if you have mollies, you would counter molly or you counter smoke choke points. In this game, it's like if you're not the agent that can deal with a specific thing that's happening, you rely a lot more on your teammates, and that's where like the composition and also like how you position yourself on the map is way more important because you rely way more on something that your teammate has. So
Yeah, for sure.
I think this nicely kind of leads into like one of the next talking points. Something that was really interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like TSM, coming up in North America as the first like sort of best team and a team which has a lot of CS experience.
mhm.
It felt like they sort of set the standards of how to play in terms of defaulting, which is very CS-esque way of playing the game. I know this is going to maybe come in. We're going to have this discussion a little bit later about how like CS impacts Valorant and and the way that you think about Valorant.
Hmm.
But we are seeing also a huge amount of success from in this game from bursting in contact based
Hmm.
plays, and you're kind of able to more readily do this in Valorant because also of agents like Cypher and Killjoy who can kind of at least give you a little bit of warning if the natural punish is there, which is the defenders just pushing for information, or
Hmm.
because that's normally how you would deal with a team that's abusing contact plays and grouping up in that fashion. So how do you kind of interpret this as Valorant players, this idea of defaulting and contacting and how it impacts the compositions and where the meta is right now in North America? Kind of an open question.
You
Hmm.
you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say like at least for us, hopefully it doesn't give too much away, but like we don't really like determine our playstyle around our comp. We determine our comp around our playstyle, right? So if we want to approach a certain map a certain way, we'll choose a comp that obviously like is like for us we like mostly like to default on most maps. So we'll choose like a comp that facilitates that, but also like you have to think about other stages of the round, right? So like sure you can have a team comp that's good at defaulting, but like are you going to be able to finish the round, right? Like are you going to be able to hit the site? Like does it make sense? Um like do we have everything? Do we have smokes? Do we have flashes? Right? Do we have duelists like scaling in? So I think yeah, I don't know. It just depends on like which team you talk to, right? Like I think everyone has their own kind of unique approach to the game. There might be some similarities, but like I think it comes down to like what they're comfortable doing and just how they view the game, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's like a good baseline. I think something too that we discuss a lot as a team, like especially when it comes to like making strategy or compositional approaches. It's like we talk about win conditions and something as, for example, like Liquid, with they're running their like triple flash no smoke comps. It's like I think comps like that are like people were flaming them and memeing them, but I think comps like that are viable and they can work. It's just that the win condition is a lot more narrow, right? It's like you have to execute your game plan almost perfectly for that kind of like it can work, and when it works and you do it properly, you look insane. But like it's a lot harder to execute. I think it's something you have to practice a lot more, and that's something we talk about too. Is like weighing it, like how much does this comp, like how good is this comp, and like what are the ways that we can win with this comp, and do we feel like that's a viable way, like to fit into how we approach the game on a map, like how we want to play it. I think those are like all questions that we discuss when we talk about these things as a team. Because I really think like any comp can work. It's just a matter of you know can your team make it work. And I think a lot of the things you see right now is like a lot of teams just copy each other with comps, but I really don't think that's like a short, like a short term way of doing things. And like if you see with like all the tournaments, the meta changes every tournament that we've played in NA, and a lot of
Yeah.
it is because teams are like like us pulling out triple duelists on Haven. Like a lot of teams are like willing to like think outside the box and play things that aren't just like in the norm. And I think that's like a big factor in the game as well.
Yeah, I feel like I completely agree. That's like another thing that you've highlighted that I think is extremely special if you compare CS to Valorant. Every big Valorant tournament, it feels like I don't even necessarily want to say anti-stratting per se, but it feels like there is, three dimensions to it. There is, what you were saying about like your approach of taking it and taking your composition and thinking, okay, well, how do we want to play the game? And that's how we're going to play our composition. And you can go into a match like that, but it feels like you can just as easily go into a match and actually try and actually play against the strengths of your opponent and try to design something specifically for that.
Hmm.
And that obviously the options for that's going to start to increase as we get more and more agents in the game. And again, this is something that in CS you can do anti-stratting and so on, but it feels like that's such a different world and that it's a bit more risky in CS because in CS it feels like fundamentals are always going to be king. And if you can just do the fundamentals, play the map in the most effective way, especially these days, I feel like that's always going to be pretty much the best way to do it. But in Valorant, it feels like you can have a different playbook for every team that you're facing. Is that something that you guys have been thinking about? Because I've seen a lot of teams that do try to just have their
Hmm.
thing and they'll just run it against everyone.
Definitely something that we've thought about. Um, it's not necessarily like a direct counter to like that style of play, but something I really hope that comes into the game if it's not going to be agent bans, because I think you need like a good amount of agents in the pool for that to work. But not just having this blind pick where we go in and you just like select all 5 agents at once, and then you just like go into the game and you just now you're finding out who everyone's playing. I think like doing like obviously without the banning portion, but just doing like a picking phase where like you pick agents that it's like one at a time or two at a time. I think would be good
Yeah.
where you can see the other team, because right now a lot of the in the tournaments it feels like if you bring something fresh, you're gonna do well in the tournament. If like for the most part, like all the teams are good that are playing in these like tier one tournaments in NA. If you bring something fresh and your approach is like unique, it's really hard for people to adapt. A lot of the game right now is like you see something that someone's ran before, people are like way more adept at dealing with it and countering it. And I think that the way that the picking system is right now, it kind of takes away that element of the game where like you get rewarded for just like doing something that people haven't seen, and there's no room for like adaptation, because like if you play a comp and there's like an agent like a phoenix or something you weren't expecting, it kind of throws a wrench into what you were trying to do. But your opportunity to make a reaction to that is like entirely in the game. You have no breathing room to think about that. But if it was like a pick phase, if they pull out the phoenix and you have last pick, you're like, shit, like we can maybe we use this agent instead. We have a good way of like dealing with this. Let's run this comp instead. So I think that's like a big element that's missing right now.
Feel like the future is actually so exciting in Valorant. Like, despite a lot of the, whenever I go to play Valorant in matchmaking, my experience is often just awful.
Yep.
Yeah.
But whenever
Oh
I
yeah.
look at tournaments and stuff and like look at the pro scene, and it's actually just really exciting, just like very engaging. So I'm at least stoked for that.
Mhm.
I actually have a specific question for you, Vice. Given that you're a Cypher head, who do you actually think is playing Cypher the best, or who are the best Cypher players? What makes a great Cypher player in North American pro scene?
Hmm. I think the only one that comes to mind, honestly, is probably Dapper. Like he does a good job of playing like dynamic, and I just think he's a good individual player too. So that's like really important to Cypher because you kind of just like in the freeze time you kind of make a plan and you put your trips down, and it's up to you to like use your cages or your cam in a smart way. And yeah, I see him do some good stuff. So I think Dapper would be pretty solid. And I think to be a good Cypher, you have to understand like kind of the game in a macro level, right? Like a lot of the time on the maps, like on defense, you're kind of spread thin, and like I said, you have sometimes like the utility you have or your teammates have on a bomb site isn't like super good for a 5-man hit or something. So it's really important to like kind of bolster up that bomb site with your trip or like a cage or a cam or something. So it's really like you really have to be a team like oriented player to understand how to play Cypher well, I would say.
Yeah.
It
I
makes
would
sense.
also say like me and Vice have a good dynamic when it comes to like in-game leading, and then obviously working with him as a cipher man, because
Yeah.
a lot of it is like me and him like trying to come up with good ways on the fly and obviously in preparation. But because the thing with cipher, like Dan said, is like you want to you have to have variance in your trips. Like there's like definitely good cipher players that can just like anchor the site and play, but to be like a really like great cipher, it's more than just like playing your site. It's really like enabling your teammates. There's so many things you can do with the camera and with trip setups that don't often see it a lot. Like really good ciphers, you'll see them mixing it up and making it like really difficult for the team to deal with. But there's a lot of times when you play and there's just like, oh, here's the trip in the same spot every round, and like it's
Just break it,
not
right?
that ideal. Yeah, it's not that
Yeah.
ideal. So that's like an element of the game as well. It's just like Dan said, reading the game and really being about like the macro decisions that are happening,
Yeah.
and thinking about what the other team is going to try to do.
Yeah, I feel like I'm seeing like as you say, like there's especially since I mean it's been a while since Jack can dash through the trips too as well. So I guess that's another reason why you don't want it to be predictable. But I have to say that I think the most awesome stuff I think from recent memory that I've seen a team do around Cypher is, and I'm sure that there's been other teams that have done it, but it's just the first time I think that I was seeing it was at the Pop Flash Invitational where we saw like
Scam.
Dignitas going for aggressive setups on Haven and mid from out B, and just
Yep.
making it possible to push at the early timing to just set up a camera in mid. And
Yep.
that's like what the purpose of it was. And I thought that was actually so brilliant. And that kind of thing is amazing because also I don't know how you would actually know specifically where that cam would even be.
Mhm.
So it feels like it's hard to punish. But what I love about it is that it costs something to do that,
Yep.
and it's
Mhm.
not just something that you can do for free. So yeah, stuff like that's really really impressive. I've been consistently impressed by the creativity I'm starting to see from teams and players around Cypher, and I feel like there's still loads more to come in that sense.
Yeah, no,
Um,
for sure.
so, moving over to your side of things then, Shinobi,
Mhm,
what is it like IGLing in Valorant? When we had Hazed on
mhm,
some weeks ago, he said that sometimes it feels, he was saying it's just impossible to read the game. Like
mhm.
it's just about just guessing it right sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd go that far and say that. I think there's definitely like, I think we have a pretty good grasp of like how a lot of the teams that we play against want to play, and I'm sure they have a decent idea of what we like to do as well. But I think a lot of the game comes down to just playing the rounds. Like that sounds so generic to say, but what I mean by that is like if you get the right ults up, you can combo that. If you combo these abilities in a way that just gives you free side control, it's very difficult to stop, especially if they're not like ready for it. If they're not prepared for that kind of thing. And I think something too that happens a lot is like people don't often prepare for the ults when like say they see like Breach has 5 out of 7 on his ult. People are not thinking like, oh shit, this Breach ult's coming in this round. We need to play in this specific way. So you can like get the orbs or get a kill and get an orb, and then now the Breach ult's super dangerous. And I think utilizing those aspects of the game is what like IGLing really is like a big part of. Obviously, working the defaults and getting information, it's like the same concepts as CS, but the element of ults really makes the game completely different in terms of like its dynamic and how it works from a calling perspective.
Mm.
Um, there's also like if I said earlier, there's a lot of like if you we talk about this a lot on the team. Like if you're defaulting a spot, if you're like your role and whatever we're doing is like to work this specific spot. If they're playing an agent composition that you just can't get anything going at that spot, we have to adapt and change what we're doing because there's a lot like you're not self-sufficient nearly as well as you are in CS because in CS everybody has smoke and two flashes. So like if you need to work a spot, you have a lot more tools at your disposal. Where in this game you're a lot more reliant on getting something from a teammate. So I think that's like finding those things and filling the gaps is also like a big part of the IGLing differences in this game. You have to make sacrifices in a lot of spots. Like to get map control here, you have to give up something elsewhere, like you would in CS. But I think it's a lot more punishing in this game because of the lack of overall utility.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think again, just it's one of those things that from a spectator's point of view, I know that as like a commentator,
Mhm.
it's amazing to because in CS it's very difficult to do sort of a strategic or tactical narrative because you can't there's just like you can't explain some of the concepts quickly enough to people and kind of get people to absorb it. But in this game, it's much more intuitive that a cipher plays the way a cipher will. Like, people just
Yep.
understand things inherently. So if you see like a viper, you already know what kind of things
Yep.
to expect. I think that element of the game, like on top of what you're talking about, also makes it feel like there's more credit towards teams that really have a great playbook and really
Yep.
have thought things through and executed things well. So yeah, it's that battle of the IGLs in Valorant is actually
Yep.
something that's really compelling to watch as well. Um, Moving forward, so we can start to talk about some of the tournaments we've had recently. So we've had Blast and Pulse. Um,
Mhm.
Mike, do you wanna bring us through with Blast? I know you were able to watch a lot more of Blast than I was.
Yeah, so obviously, like, G2 came out on top again, but at least in this finals, FPX at least showed some vulnerability towards G2. So at least now we're seeing like teams are actually looking at, okay, it is feasible to beat these guys. There is like a way that we can stop them. I thought FPX just came in with like really good game plans on every map, and that's why they're able to take a set away. There's a whole thing where people are like Liquid not using smokes. That's the reason they lost. But we obviously, like, we did the VOD review on Wednesday, and we identified like it changes the entire way you play. It's kind of like when you run Killjoy Cypher, you're not playing the same way as if you have two duelists. So, and then NIP, there wasn't really a whole lot to talk about, really. They changed up their roster as well this week, so we'll have to see in the future what that brings from them. But I guess we could start with just like the Liquid stuff a little bit. I know we touched on it earlier, but Do you guys think, like, I know Shinobi, you said like you kind of have to play perfect, but maybe we can look at like how does that affect like your early round and your mid round just to start with?
Hmm. Um, hmm. Yeah, it's hard to say like exactly how they should approach or just kind of what the changes are. But obviously with no smokes, like if you're playing on bind with no smokes, the way you want to obviously get map control is going to be solely reliant through obviously using your flashes. I'm not sure. Did they run a Sova when they played on bind?
I don't think on bind they did.
Yeah, because that would be like another way, right? Like you have like something that DDK said was like talking about like the agents and their roles. Like if you see a cipher on the map, you kind of know exactly what he's gonna do. But I think there's also like an element to the game of like using abilities in ways that you might not think or like how they should be used. Like you could use a jet updrift to get information, not just like getting high ground, right? Like you can spot over an object for your teammate, like you would jump spot, but it's like obviously like to an increased level. But we toyed around with running a comp with no smokes on Haven, and I can't really say how Liquid should approach or like what they would do in the early rounds on like the maps they played with no smoke characters. But a lot of the game is going to come around like be based around in our case was like using a drone to get information, or you're gonna want to really play around your op if you're gonna commit to getting an opper on those kind of comps, right? Because you can you have no way of like isolating angles, but you do have a lot of ways to push people off and gain space that way. So it's kind of like again a give and take in that regard. Like you might not be able to smoke heaven on bind at A, but you can triple flash the guy and scale, right? If you have a jet dashing into U-Haul while you're chaining Reyna eyes and Phoenix flashes, you have other ways of getting in. It's just not like it's more unorthodox. It's not just black and white of like how you would normally approach the map. So I don't think it's bad by any means. It just requires more. There's more like you have to actually go in and practice that a lot more to make that execute work. It's it's a lot easier to just throw a smoke at a choke point and just like block it off than having to like chain your abilities and properly scale something that you have to definitely work on over time.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what Shinobi said earlier. Like, um, when you pick a specific comp, you have to understand like what your win conditions are, right? And you have to play a certain way to, with the utility that you have to get in a good spot to win the round. And so in that sense, like I don't think that there's anything wrong with most comps, even if they're like unconventional. I think you just have to adjust the way you play the game, right? So I don't think there's anything wrong with the three duelist comp that Liquid chose, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a really cool long-term play as well because I think, like you said, having that kind of comp and experimenting with different win conditions and being able to understand how to play the game in a completely different way. Again, I think it should serve to really help them in that long-term
Yep.
game where we're going to have a lot of different agents, lots of different compositions are going to be viable, and teams that are too rigid are going to get massively punished. It kind of feels like. Are
Yeah.
you guys thinking about that long term a lot, or are you just trying to sort of go tournament by tournament?
No, definitely. Like I'll let Dan say some as well if he has anything to add. But yeah, for us, it's not obviously you want to win every tournament we play in, but we know that there's like for at least in August, right? And over the summer there was a ton of tournaments, and so it's not always necessarily about winning every tournament like as like the end goal, but you want to make sure that the things you're doing you have to try them at some point, right? You can always like theorycraft and do things in prac, but you have to at some point put it to the test in a live official match. So it's like we're okay with trying things because we know that like there's something to be learned, especially in the game right now in its infancy. Like there's always things that you're gonna learn and improve from, and I think like just relying on one way of playing or one comp is definitely like you're hindering your growth as a team. If that's like if you're just gonna be the team that's like copying what someone else did and was like, hey, we made this work for us, and you're always just like following the norm, you're never gonna be like the best team, in my opinion at least. You have to, you know, change the way that you're playing and constantly be willing to learn and adapt to your play style.
Yeah, and to add to that, like I think Valorant, the meta will change. Like we touched on this earlier. Like if there's a new agent or agent changes, right? That's gonna like steer the direction of like what comps are being played. Whereas like in CS, like the meta is kind of formed by like professional players, and Valve is like really hands off on the game. And whereas like Riot is like really hands on. Like they'll listen to the community and they'll make changes on the agent, Yeah, I just think that like it's good to have a long-term plan, obviously, but you have to be very adaptable, right? Because things can change. Like something that's been working for you for a long time and has given you a lot of success may not always be there, or there may be a different way or a better way to do things in the long run. So I think like having an abstract goal, like a long-term goal, is probably the best approach because you never know what's going to happen in the future with Riot and what they have plans for the game or plan for the game.
Yeah, for sure. It's again like everyone's speculating about the pick ban stuff, but in the
Mhm.
drafting, but as you say, like we actually don't have an idea exactly how they want to implement something like that, or maybe they won't. Maybe
Mhm.
it's going to be a free for all. It's hard to say. But speaking about Blast again, G2 are a team that has. I mean, it was actually kind of a close call for them in the finals. I don't know if you guys were able to catch all of the games, but they, as Mike alluded to, have they showed that they can be beaten, but they are unbeaten. And although they aren't the best team in the world because they cannot be because there's no international tournaments yet, that's kind of how people are beginning to talk about G2. So given the strength that they're showing, like what
Mhm.
do you guys think about this general perception of G2? Are they as immortal as they look?
Uh, well, I'll just say I think FPX looked better in the final than G2, even though they didn't win the tournament. Obviously, on split, I think that FPX should have won, and I think G2 just they show a lot of grit when they play. Like they have really good individual players, and they just outgrinded them. But I think for the lifespan that FPX has been a team compared to G2, like I think FPX is on course to being better than them in the long run. But I won't compare NA to EU because there's no way to know. The playstyles are a lot different, and there's just no way to know until you actually play each other. But from what I saw from the tournament, I think FPX looked like the better team, just maybe not in that exact moment. But I think they will be better than them in the long run.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think FPX like they showed a lot more team play, but the thing about G2 is like they're very loose, so it's like really hard to read what they want to do,
Yep.
and it's like a double-edged sword, right? Like sometimes like if they're playing well individually, like it'll work really well, but if they're not stepping up, then they can play really badly. But that I mean, it's working for them, right? They haven't really had a bad result, so yeah, I don't know. I think it's just two different play styles, like a really like loose play style versus like a really kind of like more structured play style, I'd say.
Is there anything that you guys have like picked up from these teams, like all things that you think that you're not really seeing in North America, but you saw from some of these top European teams, and you're like, damn, that's actually pretty sick.
I wouldn't say it's like something I haven't seen or thought about, but I think the way that Angel plays Brimstone, he's probably the best Brimstone in the game, just in how he is like playing out the rounds, and he's not just because the way you think about a traditional Brimstone, he's just kind of like falling behind his teammates and just like dropping smokes, and he's that's kind of it. But like he's a lot more
Yeah.
aggressive, and he with like running that kind of comp where you're running a Brimstone, he's still able to do a lot of misdirection. So like the way that they're playing the game is like there's a lot of thought behind like especially on bind. I think their use of the teleport is really good. They do it a lot more than other teams. I think when it comes to like teleport play between long B and showers. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's like it's hard to really know if you could take stuff from European teams and apply it to NA because the meta is just so different in how teams play. I don't even know if it would be like strong or not. Because just NA teams value. I mean, a lot of teams in Europe value Omen as well, but NA teams also they put a lot more weight on a lot of the duelists being at the forefront. It's weird to think that people say like NA is more like puggy because they run a lot of duelists. I feel like our strategy and our tactics in NA is way more fleshed out in my perspective. I think outside of a couple of teams in Europe.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I didn't always agree with that, but I
Mhm.
definitely agree with that now. And I think it does stem from the fact that like the top scene in North America, I think that's like the leading examples
Yep.
are very like it started out I think with that TSM default heavy sort of
Mhm.
style, and it sort of it seems that everyone sort of picked up the default thing, and then everyone sort of layered out of that
Mhm.
in various ways tactically. And I don't think that in EU have seen as much consistency in terms of that strategic approach.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm definitely with you on that, and I think The FPX one's really interesting. It does seem like they are super scary in terms of the trajectory that they have. I like the point you made about Brimstone. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Mike. I know that you've checked them out quite a bit.
I think just the way he plays them in general, like Shinobi says, like super aggressive, especially on binds. Like even though he has all their smokes, he'll be taking like the majority of the early round fights, and on their attacking side, he kind of plays them like an entry sometimes, which is really like counterintuitive almost. But compared to like a lot of people that play Omen, it's like, oh, since I like get smokes back after I use one, I need to stay alive as long as possible for post plants and stuff like that. But I think the upside of Brimstone definitely over Omen, like in pro play, is like no one's really using the TPs. Like people use the ult to get information, but that's about as good as it's good for. Or repositioning, maybe if you're on the wrong bomb site. Like Brimstone's ult just has so much upside if you're willing to like put the time into thinking about it.
I also think I think Brimstone plays into the breach meta quite nicely too, because you can get a lot of space if you combo the ults like the breach ult and the Brimstone ult. It's pretty difficult to play a lot of sites. You're almost forced in a lot of scenarios to either play retake or you have to kind of like put the pressure to them and get in their face and not really let them run their plan. Obviously, it's not you don't want to always just let teams. You never want to just let teams do what they want on
Yeah.
attack. You always want to try to keep them honest and throw different looks at them. But when you know those ults are up, if you don't have a good game plan and you're just sitting in the site and you're caught like unaware or off guard, you're gonna get punished because that's like a big team fight team, right? If you're running a Brimstone, a breach, throwing a Sova, maybe that's like it's pretty overwhelming.
So one thing actually I wanted to
Mhm.
quickly mention before we start moving on and talking about some things in the NA scene quickly is Artist did that interview and he he called out Hazed and Cutler directly
Mhm.
and as to identify that he feels as though what NA teams lack is just a as much individual skill across the board. I feel like this kind of goes to your point that Europe isn't as strategically focused
Mhm.
because I don't really feel like that take made that much sense myself. Like where do you stand on this? Do you think that because to me I'm looking at that take from artist and thinking that
Yep.
he might be setting himself up a little bit for failure possibly
Mhm.
when the clash eventually happens, or when FBX, as a team that does look like they are being a bit more strategic, do actually topple G2.
Yep. I mean, look, if G2 come to NA and they stomp everybody, then he can say what he wants to say. I think it's kind of like I don't know. Like, there's no way for anyone to know the inner workings of a team besides the team himself. Like, and
Yeah.
I'll say like in the case of like Cutler, for instance, like he gets a lot of flack, but I never see Cutler in matches. I mean, I won't say never because I think everyone's human and they'll make mistakes, but he's not like outwardly throwing the game, and he's not like trying to play in a way where he's like needs to be the star player or
Yeah.
trying to do things. I think that's like something that in this game, especially because the rules are way more rigid and because of your utility and how you have to play the game, I think you need people that are willing to do the dirty work and take like the worst roles and just like there's a lot of scenarios like for instance I have tens on my team, and if this guy needs a vandal and he can only get a bulldog, I'm gonna take the bulldog. Like I'm gonna take the specter. Like I'm not trying to be like the guy that's like I you know feeling like I need to be in the spotlight. Like I know I have a player like that who's just insane, and I'm gonna facilitate him. So I think that's like a big aspect of the game as well. That people are very quick to just like jump on people that on the scoreboard and are underperforming. But there's like in this game, I think it's more tangible to have people that are actually supporting because they're the only character that can in a lot of scenarios. So I think
Yeah.
that's like a big aspect of the game.
Yeah, I think that's a
Um,
good point though. Like you never know what an individual player is bringing to the team, right? Like intangibles. Like he could be calling, he could be like setting people up, and the scoreboard almost never reflects that. So
Yep.
it's like, I mean, unless you really watch the games or you hear the comms or you're
Yep.
even like one of the players, that's how you would really know like, is this player really valuable to the team? And
Yep.
I don't think it's fair for someone outside the team to make like a judgment on that. I mean,
I mean, I'll say
yeah,
everyone's entitled to their opinion, right? Like you can have your opinion and like no
yeah,
one's stopping you. And I think like if a team really felt that type of way about someone, they would get rid of them. Like I don't think there's any, you know what I mean? Like if
right,
TSM felt at any point like these players aren't valuable to us anymore, they're gonna make the change. But obviously they feel that there's value, so there's it's not artists to say. what TSM should do with their team. That's on them to figure it out and to work on
Exactly.
their problems and improve. And yeah, I don't know. I just think that that's like a big aspect of this game for sure.
Yeah, I think Mike and I said this at the VOD review too. People will always be sort of armchair analysts, and they will derive their opinion from the things that they see and the knowledge that they have. And so, if the knowledge is very little, then the things that they see will be very little and just be what they can see on, and all they can see is the scoreboard effectively, as
Hmm.
they don't understand maybe the greater concepts at play. So, yeah, I guess it's a part of the game, I suppose. With that said, I want to quickly go over some of the things in the North American scene in terms of
Yep.
some of the bigger teams. We have, T1 in a situation where they only have 2 players on the active roster, given that Scar's on the bench. What do you guys think is next for them? Are they in like a horrendous position? Are they going to recover?
Mm.
I don't
Uh,
know. Like I think the current landscape of like the free agents right now, right? Like
it's
you're
pretty
in a
rough.
tough yeah, you're in a tough spot right now if you need to pick up players, I would say, or you need to be paying a lot of money to buy out players. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen for them, but I wish them the best of luck. So I've been there before, and it's not a fun spot to be in.
Yeah. Um, I think something we didn't really mention it, but like something that I think makes the NA scene pretty solid right now is that there are like a good amount of actual in-game leaders that are in a lot of the top teams. And if they're not, they weren't like bred in-game leaders. They have a lot of experience. Like Shazam has like a lot of experience, and he can definitely like fit that role as being a caller. And you have like guys like FNS and these guys that are, you have Nitro, Steel, like these sorts of guys. Um, and for T1, I think they desperately need somebody that's going to be a caller, and I just don't know if there's really a good option for them because they have good players like Braxton, AZK, and Skadul. They're good players. They just I think that they definitely need like some leadership, um, and they need somebody that's gonna like set a play style for them and get people doing the things that they need to be doing. I don't know if they're gonna find that, but yeah, I wish them the best of luck.
And I think, on a similar note, 100 Thieves are sort of trying to fill out their roster from what I understand. And they have such I mean, the core of Nitro and Steel, I guess, essentially. You've got Hiko as well. It feels like it shouldn't be too difficult for them to fill out that roster. And I think they're looking for some just crazy fraggers, like some young up and coming talents. So I guess it's one of this, it's a similar thing. Do you see them figuring it out sooner than later? Is this a roster you think that has a lot of legs, or do you think it's gonna take them a while to get developed and get going?
I think they're gonna be a good team, but I think there is like a learning curve with Valorant. Like I don't think you can just come into the game and be like, oh, I was like a really good, like in Nitro's case, like a tier 1 player, and just think like, oh, this game's gonna be just free. Like I'm gonna just come in and dominate. And I don't think that's his mentality. I mean, it could be, but like you really have to come and embrace like the ideas of the game because it is like even though the at the baseline it's like similar to CS and there's a lot of things you can take away from CS and apply it to Valorant. It's not one to one. There's definitely like things like you're gonna you're gonna die to things that you should never die to in CS in this game that just go unpunished because of the way that the game functions with the agents and their abilities. And I think that's like something that can be frustrating being a CS player. Um, that comes with the learning curve of the game. It's like the territory of the game. So, but I think they'll be a good team. I don't see any way that they can't be worse than the last 100 Thieves lineup. So
Good way to look at it.
Nice. I like it. Positive silver lining. So last couple teams to talk about. Envy, they got Crashes and Food on the roster now. Obviously, we lost Calypso and God.
Akis,
Aki's,
yeah,
There we
Akis.
go.
or
Thank you,
whichever
Akis. Yeah.
version.
So this seems like it should be a pretty dope team moving forwards. Do you anticipate Food and Crashies fitting in well to this lineup?
Yeah.
I think they'll succeed. Definitely in the long term. Uh, we had scrimmed them like the first day they had gotten signed, or like the day after, and like we kind of ran them over. But I have faith in them in the long run. They just need to get some stuff down, build the team chem. I think they'll have
Yep.
success for sure.
Yeah, I think they have a good mix of players, and I saw like on Reddit people were like saying like, oh, like Crash is a Cypher one trick, and like FNS is a Cypher, and like how can they, how they're not gonna make this work? But it's like obviously they knew that this was like going to be a potential problem in their team, and then they're not going to just make the change and be like, oh shit, like we have this problem, like we don't know how to fix it. Like I think that their roles will work themselves out, and I think like all they need is just time playing together, and I think
Yeah.
that they'll be as good as their last lineup at worst case scenario. Uh, but yeah, it's a lot of the game is like there's a lot of chemistry and things that I think are really important, and then really embracing your role in the team is also important. Like if they can do that, they'll be a good team.
Awesome. Well, with that said, I think it's time to move into the final segment here. We've got the Ask Us Anything. And to kick things off, whilst you guys in the chat get your questions prepared, we have a couple questions from Twitter. And this is something we'll be doing on Twitter. So if you really desperately do want to get your questions in ahead of time, there'll often be tweets going out ahead of time once our guests are announced. So you can follow the Twitter channel to be able to do that. So first question, I think you picked this one out, Mike.
Yeah, so this one was from Maui Snake. So he said, what concepts / fundamentals are you having to unlearn from CS to be at the top of Valorant?
You know, start Dan.
That's a really good question. I mean, there's just so many layers to that. But I think just off the top of my head, like you can't really flank, right? That's a big thing in Valorant. Whereas in CS, you could flank. Like on defense, like sometimes you have to switch up the spots you're playing because your utility is just not good, or like you want to be unpredictable with like who's playing where, and like I don't know. There's just I don't know. I'm drawing blanks, but there's definitely a lot. There's definitely a lot. Like
I mean,
uh,
I,
go for it,
I, mean,
Josh.
I
Take it
can say
away.
one thing. It's not like a fundamental, but it's just kind of like a general gameplay mechanic of like CS. Like when the last time I played CS, like compared to Valorant, the game feels definitely dated, but the movement is like way more responsive, I would say, and like unlearning like counter strafing and like just going into like a crouch spray and like kills that in
Yeah,
CS, you just like go into a spray and just like destroy a guy immediately. In this game, it's like those kind of things, bad those habits from CS, you have to break because you get burned really hard in this game. If you try to aim like that, like there's so much more of like flying around a corner, stopping on a dime because you don't have to have good like counter strafing or movement like the jiggle peeking, and so it's like all it's way different. So like you just get there's players that in CS that wouldn't be as good that can just like dominate you in this game because there's just like less punishment in regards to movement and overall just like the way you aim. Um, and then like Dan said with like flanking and things like that, it's not that those like are removed from the game, but there's a lot more thought that has to go into play. Like like knowing and predicting like, oh, like there's gonna be a trip at this spot. Like how do I want to deal with this? Like do I want to just contain here? Do I want to break the trip and like put pressure on them and make them think I'm flanking? Like there's all these like little like nuances in situations that like
yeah,
those don't come into play in CS. Like in CS, if like playing an overpass and like you push A and all the T's are sitting behind your monster smoke, you kind of know like you just sit and contain them and you just know like where everybody is, and you overstack the site. But it's more complicated in this game because of like trips and like cameras and like all these like weird like little quirks that don't come up in a game like CS.
yeah. And not to mention like everything, or like mostly everything in Valorant is like wall bangable. So
That's it.
that goes into like with uh like Sova just like pinging you and you just get wall banged, right? Like that never happens in CS. Also just like getting information in general, like you can get information so safely in Valorant, whereas like in CS you have to take a risk, you have to commit your body kind of right to get information. So I think um I don't think I really like that aspect of Valorant, but that's like a whole nother thing. I won't get into it right now, but yeah, that's definitely a big thing for me, I would say.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. Like I feel like in Valorant you have to be somebody that you have to accept that mechanics won't get you everywhere as well, because it
Yep.
feels like you need to be able to adapt, you need to be able to understand how to read the game correctly because there's so many. I feel like, it's just seeing a composition that tells you a lot already. That
Yep.
if you looked at the different composition, that would tell you something completely different. And so, you have to have players that can read the game in that way and not rely on just like the patterns, the grind, the routine. Because I found this in like a lot of different games myself that you'll get the players that are mechanically really gifted and they'll get to the top because they're just copying people.
Yep.
But I feel like in Valorant, you can't quite get away with that as much. You do genuinely have to be able to think pretty well about the game, I think.
I,
That's at least my take.
I think that, and then also like in CS, because roles don't really change in CS, right? Like you might have to fill a different role in a team, but fundamentally the way that you'd play the role is pretty similar, right? The meta is pretty stagnant. This game, if like you're a jet one trick and then they just like blow your agent up, all of a sudden, like if you want to be relevant, you need to adapt your
Yeah.
play and you need to become like you have to be a well-rounded player. Like you're not going to be able to just like be a lurker and play like one way. Obviously, like you get countered in CS. Like if you're one dimensional, people will counter and pick up on your tendencies. But in this game, it's like even more so apparent that you have to be adaptable because you know, like you said with the counter striking aspect. Like if you just do one thing, teams are just gonna jump on it and they're gonna punish you really hard. And I think that's like a big element of the game that's never a thing in CS. Agent because there's agents.
All right. So the next question from Asanov is, why is Brimstone, despite being as good or better than Omen in some aspects, almost never picked at all?
Hmm.
I think for me at least, like the benefits to Omen over Brimstone would be like you can smoke like from across the map, and especially on defense, like if you have a Brimstone and he drops a smoke on your site, but you know he usually plays the other site, then that could give you information as to like, oh, they're overstacked here, or they're doing something different here this round, right? Um, and the fact that Omen has rechargeable smokes, so you could smoke more than 3 times in a round if you really wanted to. And also just the flash and playmaking ability of Omen. It's just I think that's probably why teams gravitated more towards Omen. And obviously, like there's a Brim nerf. It wasn't that big of a nerf, but I think having only 6 charges for his ulti was like might have been a big draw to play Brim more because you could get more ultis out in a half before. But yeah,
I could think of the biggest thing with Omen. The fact that his smokes are way bigger
that's
kind
true.
of
Yeah.
helps you deal with jet operators, which is like a really big thing in NA, is like the dominance of the ops and people playing jet. So I think like having Omen, and obviously people weren't playing Breach, right? Like there was very few teams, like Sentinels maybe one of the only teams that played Breach, maybe TSM a little bit in the beginning with like Gen G, but that kind of got phased out. Um, as like the jet op came into play a lot more. And because a lot of people weren't running with a lot of flashes, you really needed the paranoia. Like originally, the paranoia was like useless. Like it was just the worst ability in the game, I think. And then when they buffed Omen, it just became like the best flash. And his smoke range was like insane. And I think everything about Omen's kit is just solid. Like I don't think Brimstone is bad by any means. I just think Omen does it a little bit better. I think the only scenario where Brimstone excels and is better is actually like bursting onto a site. You can just like quickly drop your smokes, and there's no waiting to like smoke every spot, because like with Omen you can only throw one smoke at a time. But if you're creative or if you put some thought into that, having characters that can flash, it negates that downside. You just would flash the angle that's not being smoked, and you scale as the other smokes coming in. Um, you see that in CS as well, right? Like running in with the smokes. That's like a concept you can apply with Omen.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I totally agree with that. Some really interesting points. And the next question is from Space TV. I like this one. When Hazed was on the show, he said, in order to beat Sentinels, you need to not care and be in their face, not allow them space. Do you guys agree with this, or what was your game plan going into facing them?
Mm, I I don't know if I necessarily say that. I mean, like maybe to some extent, but like for instance, the comp that we had ran on Split, when we played them in the upper bracket finals, and we took the map off of them, we actually had never ran that comp in practice like a single time. But I'd watched their game from the tournament, like just from spectating, right? Obviously, like watching on the stream, and from what we knew in practice, we knew that they had like a lot of tendencies. I won't say exactly what tendencies, but we felt like a really defensive comp against them could counter them because they rely a lot on like individuals making plays and getting information. I don't think you necessarily have to, like I think maybe running at them and like playing more scrimmy is like one solution to that. We felt like making them forcing their hand and making them have to actually play out the rounds. I felt like was a better approach to dealing with them on their attack, and I think it worked out decently. Not as well as we would. I mean, obviously we still won the map, but I think it could have been played better. But with no prac on the comp, I was satisfied with how it played out. And then really, I feel like on Haven, I think we should have won. Like Bind, we kind of just like got owned. They played way better than us, but I feel like we should have won the series 2-1 against them. I think we played a better game, but Sick, man. Every time we
Sick,
play
yeah.
them, he like a lot of
Huge
people talk
impact
about
player.
Sinatra, and he's a good player, but I think Sick is like their best player. He's like their most consistent. Every time we play them, he just does like absolutely absurd things, and
Yeah.
just I don't know. He's insane, and I really think like he's the difference maker when we play them. He's like the reason why they win when we play them in most of the games.
100% agree with that. Yeah.
Nice. I
Yeah.
like that. And maybe the patches are just trying to nerf Sick as well, given how much they've been hitting
Possibly, yeah.
Sage.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So Level asks, from the beginning of the Ignition series, you guys have consistently improved every tournament. What do you guys attribute that to?
I think the big thing is just getting Vice on our team. That was probably the biggest.
Aw.
He's an insane player, but no, I mean just having consistent five because we played the first tournament with Poach and we were just trying out a lot of people. Our team was kind of up in the air. We had Infinite at one point, and I think just getting a five that fit what we needed in terms of like our communication and whoops, sorry. Yeah, just those kind of things. Like I think we were lacking a bit, and he has a lot of experience, and just getting that time to really like crack down on how we want to approach the game. Because I would say my calling style, I'm a very like loose calling style. Even though I wouldn't say we play like ultra loose. Like we definitely have things that we want to do, but I'm more on the fly. I'm not really like thinking about or going into the server and like we're like hard like making strats and like anti-stratting. It's a lot of like most of our executes, besides like things that we've learned through repetition, it's like specifically microing and calling like, hey, we're gonna do this, like we're gonna go here and do these sorts of things. Because I feel like it makes it harder to read, like because a big part of this game right now is definitely countering and anti-stratting, and I think having that play style it might be harder to play reliably, but I think it's a better overall approach to the game. Just relying on mid round and on the fly adaptations, I think is a better approach, and that's kind of how we've developed our game over the course of the Ignition series.
Yeah, yeah. I think I completely agree as well. You guys have been consistently impressing and also defying, I think, expectations too, which is always a good path to be walking. Mike, do you have any questions? I don't know if I can see any other ones in the chat. We've got time to squeeze in one more before we close out the show.
Scroll up to see if I can find anything, or if anyone has anything they just come up with, just post it now.
It's putting you on the spot.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see how the teams are developing because I
Mhm.
expected TSM to kind of fall down a little bit because it felt like to me I wasn't seeing them really change much, and I was worried that they would get too locked in to what they're doing. And it does like I am like you were mentioning, what if Jet does get nerfed?
Mhm.
That it feels like that's gonna clip the wings of TSM a little bit if Wardell's unable to play Jet, for example. So in that sense, also there's volatility there too.
Mhm.
So I feel like and it felt like Envy obviously before they lost, Calypso and Akis, it felt like they were improving pretty rapidly as well.
Yeah.
So and Sentinels too, obviously, are doing a good job in staying pretty agile with their lineups and so on. So it's a really, I think the NA scene has been extremely interesting to follow.
Yeah. No, for sure. I also about the Wardell thing. I mean, he was playing Sova before, and I actually think his playstyle. I think he actually fits better playing on Sova than on Jet.
Ah.
So I don't think that'll actually hurt them that much. Because I really don't think he's like that aggressive. Like compared to like some of the other Jets that you see, like Tens or Shanks and these guys that are just like psychotic almost, like icy, where they're just like in your
Yeah.
face, flying around. Like it's not. I don't think that's really. I don't think that's like Shazam's playstyle really either. I think that like the Jet op is like obviously you use it because it's really good and the mobility is insane, but I don't think it necessarily hinders those players as much as like some other players that really rely on the toolkit of Jet to be effective.
And that is like one of the true like things we're missing out on, like in not having lands at the moment. The fact that we can't have like Shanks on land, like cackling wildly every time he like picks someone with an operator, just getting into people's heads. That would be so sick. Be like the Smooya of this
Mhm.
game or something.
Yeah.
All
I'm
right, what do
excited
we?
for the
We
first
got
line.
we got
Yeah.
one from Deej. Where do you guys see Killjoy in the current meta?
Good one. I'm not sure. You go first, Josh.
I think all right. I think Killjoy is solid. And, like I think uh again going back to what I said about like Sage not being as viable right now or not being picked as much means that there's like a more variance in the playstyle. You can be a lot more aggressive and fast paced on T side. I actually think Killjoy can counterbalance that a bit because you can use your turret, the mollies. Like it's Cypher's cam is I think like invaluable in a lot of cases, and that's like the best part about Cypher. Like more than his trips. Like I don't think his trips are actually that good. Besides like the basic information that it provides, but the camera is really like insane. But I found it's getting more and more difficult to get a lot of good value and mileage out of Cypher's kit overall outside of the camera. And I think like you can make an
Yeah.
argument like that Killjoy for this current meta provides more when it comes to like actually dealing with the things that teams are running at you. And I think that's like something you have to evaluate as well, right? It's not necessarily like how good is an agent on their own, but how does it function into the meta that people are currently playing, and whether or not um, it has value to counteract that, right? Because I think Killjoy in like the meta like before Breach, not as good as Cypher. Like we were running the Killjoy obviously, like we were using it on like Ascent, and it was more using Killjoy. I think in those things was more like it's just new, right? It's something fresh, something we wanted to test out and kind of see in the tournament. With like the limited practice that we had with the Killjoy, but yeah, I think as the meta's developed with Breach, I think Killjoy's definitely strong, and I think you'll see teams look to agents like Killjoy as a way of dealing with the playstyle that Breach is enabling right now.
That's some good points. Yeah, yeah, definitely makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm curious if we'll I'm curious about that too because I feel like there is a lot of Killjoy stuff we haven't seen in terms of just even just like lineups with the
Yep,
nano swarm and stuff like that. It's not too
yep,
common. I feel like in some of the games I've seen at least.
yep,
But with
definitely.
that said, that brings us to a close for today's show. So thank you so much, Vice. Thank you so much, Shinobi, for joining us. It's such a pleasure to having you guys on the show, chatting with us here in Immortal Minds. And before I start doing my whole spiel, do you guys have any shout outs or things that you want to plug? Yeah, you guys streaming? Are you guys doing anything that you want people to divert their attention to?
Uh, yeah, follow me on Twitter at vice_cs. I stream occasionally, maybe like once every 2 months. So if you want to check that out, twitch.tv/vicecsgo.
And not
Yeah.
not a lot of streaming, but you can follow me on Twitter, Shinobi_FPS. I'll shamelessly plug that in the chat as well. And shout out Jay Maldo.
Who is this J Maldo
In the
person?
chat.
He's
He's
lighting up our chat.
he's just a friend of ours.
Yep.
He's the funniest guy in Valorant, so have to give a
Nice.
quick shout out there. But yeah, no, thank you guys so much for having us on the interview. It was a lot of fun.
Yep.
Awesome. Cheers, guys. And for those of you in the chat, if you're new to the show, we have a Discord that is popping for a variety of reasons. We have ways for you to find like-minded individuals, whether that's just people that you can chat about the current matches that are going on. We've got a really awesome like match discussion channel, so you can just chill and watch any of the professional matches and just chat about the games. Or you can actually, tag yourself with your rank and the agents that you play, and you can search for other people to queue with so that your matchmaking experiences isn't hopefully quite as toxic and hopefully a little bit better. We will be live on Wednesday with our next show, which is the typical VOD review. Actually, we also have you guys, Vice and Shinobi, here still. What do you? Is there any games do you think that we should do for our VOD review? Is there a Cloud9 match maybe that you want us to do
Ooh,
on our VOD review coming up?
ooh.
Not off the top of my head, but
You want one
maybe
that looks
our most recent one against
Diggs is one that
Sentinels.
looks us good. I mean, you can watch us play against Dig on Haven with the triple duelist. That was a nice one for us.
For us. Yeah.
Also against MV, I think the first series we played against them, I think was a
Yeah,
really
don't
good
don't watch the second
series.
series, please.
Okay.
I think we actually did the second series like
Yeah,
a few
yeah,
weeks ago.
I popped in when you guys were doing
Oh,
it.
of course, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the first best of three we played against them in Pop Flash is a good one. I think. And then yeah, that's probably all I can think of at the top of my head. Maybe Haven against Sentinels from the upper bracket final. I think that
Yeah.
could be good. Probably the G2 FPX if you guys haven't done any of those already. Maybe Split. I think that was a good one as well.
Nice, I like it. Thank you. Thanks for the
Yeah.
suggestions. We'll see what we can come up with. Once again, thank you guys, and to all of you out there in the chat. We will see you on Wednesday for that VOD breakdown. We'll let you know what it's going to be on the Twitter. But until then, we'll see you on the next show.
Sounds good.